Climify is independent of climate designers. The views expressed on Climify are solely those of the host, Eric Benson, and guests of each episode, and do not represent the views of the climate designers. Hey, it's Eric. Welcome to the wrap-up episode of Climify Season 5. After I finished recording the season, Jenny Morgan, a guest from episode 2 of this season, reached out to me with this great idea of wrangling all the women from the season onto one big epic panel. You'll hear in this episode how truly challenging that was, considering how prolific and busy my guests from this season are. This episode of Climify is an edited version of that August 5th panel entitled The Climate Shift, Action, Optimism, and What Matters Now. The event was 90 minutes with 20 minutes of introductions and an exercise. I cut out that exercise in this episode, a 50-minute panel, and then a 20-minute Q&A with the audience, which I truncated a bit. I hope you truly enjoyed this great meeting of hopeful heroes, or as we called it in our month-long email planning chain, Climate Optimists Assemble. Welcome, everyone, to the Climate Shift, Action, Optimism, and What Matters Now event. And it's featuring all 6 guests from this previous season, Season 5 of Climify, who are together all rooted in optimism for our future. And I will give us a little sidebar here, and everyone who has been involved in the email chains, which is all of our panelists and Bhavna, who has been helping out on Climify for a couple of years. It is a miracle, actually, that these busy people were able to find a date and a time to be with you today. And we did find it, and it is right now. So I'm happy to have them here. Now, optimism is the term of the day. And if you remember watching Pee-wee's Playhouse, there's always a word of the day, and today is optimism. But our panelists differ and are similar in their approaches to that term optimism. And that's the word we will be unpacking in this 90-minute panel today. Hopefully you can see that it's being transcribed and recorded. And before we get into all introductions, maybe I should say who I am, if you haven't met me before. Who am I? I'm Eric Benson. I'm the host of the Climify podcast, where I met all these wonderful people. And I'm also associate professor and chair of graphic design and design for responsible innovation at the University of Illinois. That's not in Chicago. That's in Champaign-Urbana, which is about 2 hours south. We're in the Big Ten with like UCLA, USC, Michigan. So I'll be moderating today, and I'm going to start with a few bits of housekeeping as that's my job. We've saw who you are from putting it in the chat. And if you haven't yet, this is our happy hour-ish panel. So grab a coffee, tea, something bubbly, maybe even an adult beverage. That's up to you. So next up, who are these amazing panelists? First of all, they have done and are doing so much. And if I were to read each one of their bios, it would take way too long, as phenomenal as they are. So as I'm reading through, Bhavna, let's introduce Bhavna. Bhavna Bhavani Shankar. She's been helping me for 2 seasons on Climify. She's here today, help with moderation. Bhavna, feel free to drop your URL and information into the chat too. But she's going to be dropping in the websites of our panelists. So first, the first person that was on our season was Therese Genari. Wave Anne. She is a TEDx speaker, educator, and author of a really great book called The Climate Optimist Handbook. As a workshop host and communicator, Therese focuses on shifting the narrative on climate change so that we can act with courage and excitement rather than fear. So our second panelist is Jenny Morgan. Hi, Jenny. Jenny is a dedicated advocate for sustainable change with expertise spanning corporate social responsibility, social and environmental impact, the B Corps movement, and climate strategy. Her passion lies in creating lasting positive impact and fostering collaboration within the climate movement. Cate O'Neill. Hi, Cate. Cate is a tech strategist, author, and keynote speaker focused on human-centric digital transformation. As founder of KO Insights, she advises global brands and cities on data, AI, and innovation. As a former early Netflix employee, she's authored 6 books and is recognized by Thinkers 50 and Google for her positive impact. Cate Mingoya-LaFortune. She serves as Groundwork USA's Chief Officer of Climate Resilience and Land Use. Cate is a people-centric climate adaptation planner, community organizer, educator, parent, and cautious optimist. She holds a BA in biology from Reed College, a Master of Science Education from Lehman College, and a Master of City Planning. She has a lot of degrees from MIT. She is the author of the recently published book and audiobook, Climate Action for Busy People. So Cynthia Leung is a clean energy leader. Hi, Cynthia. With 15 years of experience across solar energy efficiency and battery storage. She's driven $1 million plus in revenue at Mox. I always mispronounce this. Moxion. Yeah. Supported 1 gigawatt of solar development and mentors global leaders through a group called Tech Women. She holds an MS in sustainability management from Columbia University. And last but not least, our last guest of the season is Dr. Dana Fisher. She is a professor, author, and expert on activism, democracy, and climate policy. She directs CECE at American University and is a senior fellow at Brookings. Her latest book, Saving Ourselves from Climate Shocks to Climate Action, inspired her 2024 TED Talk on apocalyptic optimism. She's published widely and advised national and global institutions. So there we are. That's who's here today. Walking through the term optimism can be kind of difficult for some because we may not be at that optimistic viewpoint yet. But the first question I have, what's giving you hope in what's happening in the climate movement?
Well, my theory of change is pretty dark. I think I'm the darkest of the optimists here today, as anybody who listened to our conversation probably knows. And from the term being an apocalyptic optimist, my whole theory of change is embedded in the reality of the climate crisis. Having worked as a contributing author on the IPCC, it's impossible to ignore the science. And also, I am acutely aware that we have to recognize and come to terms with the reality of the science to understand where we are so that we know where we need to go. And as a result of that, I have to say that so here's my dark perspective. The reason that I am optimistic is because we're getting closer and closer to the abyss. And that actually, in my theory of change and the research that I've done and many other people have done, that actually is what sparks people to mobilize and to engage. And I am very hopeful that we are getting really close to the type of mass mobilization that's needed to push back and achieve the kind of systemic changes we need. And I can give examples about that, but I don't want to hug the floor. So that's what makes me, optimistic that things are getting so bad. So that's me.
I can piggyback off of that if that's okay, because even as the climate optimist, I think people tend to mistake optimism as toxic positivity or wishful thinking, or I'm just going to put my belief in a better future and hold on to that. But that's so many like spiritual bypassing, and it's toxic in different ways. And to your point, Dana, what I'm seeing is, and when people reach out to me and ask, is there still hope for our future? Is there still optimism? I need to remind them that the optimism is in our actions. No one can tell anyone that we can figure this out or that we will figure it out, because that storyline is yet to be written. And it really comes back to like, what do we choose to do today? So for me, similarly, the optimism, even within the Trump administration, or maybe because of it, I think I loved what the Biden administration was doing. And I don't want to go into too much politics, but maybe we just had like the little wins felt good because we had none for so long. And so we held on to that and felt like, okay, we are moving in the right direction and that's good. And so we have something to applaud. But now when we're going in such a backswing in the opposite direction, we're forced to wake up and say, okay, what can we do? And I am sensing that from people, that more and more people want to step into their own leadership. They want to become more active in their local communities. And they're saying, like, hell no, basically, like, we're not going to just continue to accept this. So that's what I'm holding on to in my hope and optimism, is with the people who are saying we cannot let this continue to happen. So it's a very similar answer, that, the optimism is in our actions. And so let's really remind people that we create that every single day.
I think that's a great point, because the infrastructure that's being built, not just for climate, but also for things like immigration or income inequality, is an infrastructure that's important for any kind of social change. So in some ways, there's some hope that's percolating that any type of organizing will give us some of the momentum to move forward. I am more of an adaptation planner than a mitigation planner. I think we're locked into a certain amount of screwed no matter what, and I've kind of made peace with that. But I think that some of the good news is that we already know what to do in terms of alleviating some of the consequences and risks of the climate crisis. If you've ever been to a neighborhood with a really healthy tree canopy cover, if you've ever been to a neighborhood with parks and green spaces, if you've ever been someplace that actually has a drainage in the neighborhood, you've been to places that are well adapted to some of the more moderate impacts of the climate crisis. So we know what to do. Part of the task is getting it distributed. And actually, a lot of that infrastructure is not terribly expensive in the grand scheme of like sending rockets to the moon. We've got the ability, we've got the technology, we've got the human capital as well as the ideas to be able to make it happen, and that's a big part of the battle. So I feel great that we already know what to do. We just have to do it.
I see an appetite as well. I think that in administrations of the past that were a bit, or at least more recent past, were more accommodating to those that were concerned about the climate crisis. There was a significant amount of the population that was ignored in that, or at least felt so. And so I've personally seen people having a more personal relationship with the climate crisis that goes beyond the science. They're actually living and experiencing it every day. And so now it is becoming something that they see as a priority that might not be showing up in the polls or the surveys that we're seeing now, but I'm somewhat repeating what we're us being in a situation right now that is making the crisis much more personal and at everyone's front door. I'm also seeing a bit more savviness as well of the way that it's communicated, where it doesn't necessarily have to be this I love nature and I am, I have my own compost in my backyard. It's like something where I actually am cost sensitive and I believe in efficiency and I, want to have my livelihood protected, and making it a much more human conversation, which I think is easier to grasp.
Jenny, you just had a interesting event with Republican Benji Backer about climate change, and I missed the event. Is there anything that was sort of hopeful coming from this conversation with? I mean, he says he's a environmentalist to some level.
Yes. So I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. I did need to go into it knowing that this was one individual representing one sector of the US population that is interested in conservation. And I had to really make sure that we were solely focused on that. There wasn't much reference to emissions and global warming, the impacts to those that don't identify under certain demographics. And I had to be really strong in understanding that there can be good that comes out of an individual that believes in climate action, engaging with people that have been excluded from the conversation and take it for what it is. And so I think that that's growth and progress, and something that I feel like optimism is a choice. I am not a glass half full individual. I was not born that way. I'm choosing to do that because I think it will have better results. And so going into that conversation, while there were many voices in my mind during it, I had to remember that this can represent progress, and I need to be satisfied with that at this moment in time.
Mm.
It's intentional.
Yeah. Cynthia or Cate, what's keeping you optimistic currently?
I guess I'll hop on real quick. But I was thinking about this, and it's hard. I think all of us panelists have been in this space for at least a decade or even 2 decades at this point, and we've known about this issue. And I remember the time when I was in college, and I was like, "Hey, we should care about this." And people were like, "That's great. I'm gonna keep doing the thing I'm gonna do." And I was like, "All right, well." And I think now, though, what's keeping me optimistic is that my friends are coming up to me with climate solutions I didn't know of. They're like, "Hey, Cynthia, did you hear about that?" Or like, they're like, "Hey, I got an EV." And like, this is just becoming like part of the conversation. And for me, a long time ago, I was like, Earth Day shouldn't be Earth Day. Like, why do we celebrate it one day? It should be every day. And now it's actually like a standard. There's people who think like this is normal. And I think the more that this becomes normalized, the more I have hope that people are like kind of catching in. And I'm having a lot of these like serendipitous conversations with actually a lot of young people I meet randomly, like rock climbing at a cafe. And they're like, I want to go into climate policy, or I'm actually working on project management. And I tell them that I've built a career in clean energy. And we dive into like a half an hour conversation about it. And it just like, it gives me hope that even right now, as we're feeling that dissonance, right, that sadness of where we're at, and I think, Danny, you make a great point about how we're, like, reaching this breaking point, right? We're like, there's enough risk that it's time that people take like, mobilize and take action. We're also reaching a point where people are feeling the dissonance between the mismatch of values in their job and their work versus their personal values and our values as a society, and I think of how, like, we have one chance to live our life. So why not live in that one life so deeply aligned with my values as a human, as someone in my workforce and someone in my community? Like you stop living multiple lives trying to fit the peg into multiple audiences and you just live one life. And it's such a freeing thing when I see people do that. So as I'm talking to more people about how they want to shift their focus, their careers into this space or volunteer in this space, I'm like, I'm seeing more people get activated in a way that deeply aligns with who they are and their values. And that makes me so happy that like people are living their lives more fully because of that and having that positive impact beyond it.
I love that. I'll add to much of what's been said. I love these terms, cautious optimism and apocalyptic optimism. Those are fantastic. I will add my take on it is strategic optimism. And I have always thought that what we need to be thinking about is how to identify the risks we need to manage and the hopes we need to work toward and do those both simultaneously. And I'm finding that to be a resonant philosophy. I'm finding that people, kind of align with that when I speak about it. And so that gives me hope that there seems to be this sense that, yes, we can do that. The other thing is in my most recent book, What Matters Next, I made the choice to, even though I was talking about tech decision making in a human centric way, I made the choice to use examples, very, very plain spoken examples about climate throughout and using in talking about decisions that sacrifice present for future and decisions that sacrifice future for present, kind of pitting those concepts against one another. I used an illustrative example about how with climate, there's just about no action that we could take today that in 10 or 20 years we would think was too much, right? Like we're going to want to have done more. And that feels like it's a strong stance to take to be very, sort of plain spoken about that in a business book. And yet I hear repeatedly from people who read the book that they're really appreciative of the clarity of that example. So I think there seems to be this kind of groundswell, this movement in the discourse and the sort of public mindset. So to echo what's already been said, I think it does come to a point where at a mainstream level or enough of a mainstream level that there's momentum toward, all right, we need to do something. Let's do it.
Well, you mentioned strategic optimism. You mentioned apocalyptic optimism.
Mm.
I know Anne has a bunch of different ways that she has defined optimism. So I'm curious about how all of you in your language define optimism.
yeah, I've given it a ton of thought over the years because I don't want to end up in that category of toxic positivity. And climate optimism for me, in a very simple term, is active, and it's a practice, not a choice. And it's just like if you want to stay healthy and be fit and look a certain way, you have to commit and continue to commit. You can't just make a decision one day and eat one healthy salad and that's it. So it's something that we have to continue to nurture. So for me, climate optimism is born and nurtured in this intersection of grounded awareness and understanding for what's going on in a balanced and healthy way, like recognizing what is my own limit, how much can I take in without feeling helpless and like lost in despair. So building the inner leadership that can continue to stay aware of what's going on and up to date. And then we have to pair it with empowered action and finding my joy in this work. It's been brought up from other people here, but we have to really allow ourselves to get excited and almost a little bit nerdy about what we're trying to create. So my work in climate optimism is helping people make these narrative shifts that maybe we shouldn't get so focused on fighting the old world or even trying to save the old world. Like, let's recognize that much of that world isn't working. What are we getting all amped up about to create moving forward? And so it's not just about avoiding the disaster and the whole narrative shift of like, okay, if we just make people afraid enough of what might happen, then they will spark to action. And we can see from a neuroscience standpoint and from behavioral psychology that actually the opposite tends to happen. We get overwhelmed, we feel paralyzed, and we get complacent. And so the narrative of trying to avoid something that's so big isn't working. And so instead, let's build a picture or paint a picture of the future that we're trying to create and get excited about activating that future today. And then in that picture, find your piece of it. Like, don't just minimize yourself. Don't just cut down where you can. Don't just feel guilty about all the things you're doing wrong. Instead, recognize, where can I matter? How can I get excited? Where can I maximize my positive impact? And how can I grow that impact in the community around us? And so that is climate optimism to me. It's finding your own unique leadership, feeling good about who you are, and continue to show up in that practice and recognize that as we do so, we're building the future step by step. That's a long answer to it, but it's such a complicated question because it's not just like this is optimism, this isn't. It's all of it. And I think we have to just get, committed to all of that.
I can piggyback on that because I think Anne Therese and I had a wonderful conversation ourselves on my podcast. And I love that we've brought both of those perspectives to this podcast and the discussions here. But we align on this idea of optimism as action. And in my discussion about strategic optimism, one of the ways I relate to it is through the discourse about the future, because so much of my work is about future readiness with organizations, trying to help them prepare for what kind of future they need to lay technology in for and think about innovation around. And what I find is that people are very ill prepared to talk and think about the future. And one of the mechanisms, or one of the techniques that I figured out over the years is that we we have only really been taught to think about the future in two ways, and that's through sort of science fiction and culture and literature, which have really only given us dystopia and utopia to frame the discussion. And the problem with that is really almost nobody thinks utopia is an option. And so that leaves us only with shades of dystopia for everything we talk about. And it's a really debilitating type of framing for any way to consider the future, that any new change, any new thing is just more or less dystopian. And instead of that, what I find is that if we use this strategically optimistic approach where we say, look, what the model of dystopia versus utopia was supposed to be doing for us was to show us dystopia is about what we fear and what we don't want to have happen, and utopia is about what we wish could happen. And if we took that and actually made a rigorously strategic model from it, if we said, look, let's build risk mitigation strategies around what we don't want to have happen, but we also have to create that which we wish would happen. We can't just leave that to chance. We have to actually build systems that are more likely to produce those hopeful outcomes. That to me is what this comes down to. Is you have to be as explicit about what you're hoping for as what you hope won't happen. And you have to work just as hard, if not harder, to create those hopeful outcomes.
I feel like Cate is describing product market fit, which I know that there's a few, tech and PMs there in the audience, but what actually produces the results that we want? It's an optimistic mindset. I do a workshop where I show facts about the climate crisis and I take it from a doomsday lens and then an optimistic lens. And all of it is true and all of it is factual and up to date. And I have everyone just talk about their level of motivation. And no matter what they're representing in the story, their levels of motivation are severely lower than when compared to hearing positive news. And so my choice for optimism is that it is strategic because it actually does produce the results that we want, and that's my ultimate goal. So I think it just gets people excited, it gets people motivated, and it helps people keep the stamina that's required to address this issue because it requires stamina. We have to wake up every day, look at our phone if we feel so inclined, and
Or
then
not. Yeah.
keep walking forward. And the
Mm.
only way we can do that is if there's hope. And so we have to keep hope alive to be able to keep people walking forward.
I'm really interested in Dana and Kate's response to this because of your work in politics and then resiliency and community.
One of the things I've been thinking about a lot lately is this might be controversial. You can come at me in the chat for it if you disagree. I'm willing to discuss it. I think dominant American culture, we are a very innovative people, but I don't know if we're a super imaginative people. I don't know if across the board, as a dominant culture, we are able to envision a world that is much better and much different than ours. I think it's hard to look past that, and I think that, one of the elements that feels really important to me in terms of cautious optimism or being somewhat optimistic about the climate crisis is being able to show people really small changes that feel within their locus of control. I am a parent to an elementary school age children, and everyone that I know is just exhausted. Like everyone I know is one broken dishwasher away from a mental breakdown. It's so people don't necessarily have time for this big imaginative exercise of, well, what could this future look like? They want to know, hey, I'm worried about the world I'm leaving for my kids. I'm worried about my electricity bill. What can we do now? And I think showing people these really small, what I call 1% solutions, because there's no panacea that's going to fix this. There's no magic wand, but if you have a couple more trees on your block, or if you can keep your neighborhood's basements from flooding so that you're not dealing with mold and destroyed property, like these are little things that can feel really tangible that I think collectively can build up to something bigger. So that really big stuff, especially around mitigation, absolutely has to happen. But the slice that I've chosen to focus in on a lot is how do you give people hope that something is within their locus of control? Because it's really easy to feel hopeless in the best of times. It's really easy to feel helpless at the best of times. So what is in your locus of control? Well, what is? We were talking about this before we got online. If you're having a heat wave, like 90% of the continent was last week, and you've got trees in your neighborhood, they're under extreme stress right now. Go grab a jug full of water, like an empty milk jug, and just give them 2 glugs of that, just 2 full bottles. That's something within your locus of control, something that's small. And the idea is that once you get past that barrier of a really small intervention that someone can take to make their community safer from the climate crisis, that opens up this world a little bit of being able to do something bigger. So that's kind of how I think about my responsibility related to spreading that optimism is showing people you can make a small change, you can make a medium change, maybe you can make a big change eventually if you're ready.
I love what everybody has said. It's just been keeping my mind going in so many different directions. I mean, for me, I also agree with many of the other people here who think about climate optimism as a mindset. The way that I think about it is I think about climate optimism as the way that we think about channeling ourselves and channeling people power. And a lot of what I talk about and a lot of what I discuss in Saving Ourselves, my most recent book, is thinking about how we embrace people power to create community, create solidarity, and cultivate resilience. And so I actually work at the intersection between mitigation and adaptation. Although in my work, we talk about the 4 R's of climate work because many people you talk to, including people who were in the most recent, Biden administration and others, don't understand the difference and use the words wrong. So one of the things that I've been doing in my work is trying to get a more active way of thinking about climate work. But I think that in all of this, when I think about optimism and my kind of pathway to optimism and to maintaining optimism, a lot of times I talk to people about how they individually need to find their personal superpower, right? Because we don't all need to be activists. And when you are an activist, every single one of us will have a very different tactic and form that our activism might take. And our activism might take the the form of watering the trees in our neighborhoods, right? It could be about getting rid of, creating permeable surfaces in our areas so that they flood less. It can be about mobilizing, our kids' schools so that the kids actually learn about climate change in some way that actually resonates with them and is connected to our community. But it also could be about, joining a Tesla takedown in your community. I mean, you could do all those things and more. And so I think that finding our superpower and finding people and collectives in which to harness and channel your superpower is what makes me optimistic, because I know that when people do that, that is how we get to the type of changes we need.
I'm happy to jump in on this last part to maybe close this out because I love these different ways we've identified optimism. I like the strategic, the apocalyptic, the active. Mine is realistic optimism. So I guess you all have a different spin on it. And I think of it how I hope for the best and I expect what's going to happen because I don't want to be caught off guard. And that I think that's what like counters a bit of that like idealism that might sometimes feel like blinding or like we can do it, it's gonna be great and we're all gonna come together, and you're like, well, not everyone thinks that way, and and other people have different like motivations and values or maybe other circumstances, right? Like maybe they are one dishwasher away from a breakdown and you're like, you can't just expect everyone to step up and be like, why aren't people showing up? Like that's a very kind of like one like tunnel vision view of how we can step up. And I love to comment that, like, from Dana, but like, we each have a different role. Some people are gonna be really loud at a protest, and I love that. And some people are gonna donate, and some people are gonna do like their own thing in their own way. They'll water the tree outside of their yard, and that's what they got, and that's a great thing. And I think about how like it starts with that realistic optimism, then the radical acceptance of what is. You're like, if I can radically accept that the circumstance is bad and that like the I can do this much and this is the realm of the possibility that I can impact change and also succeed in it. You can also build momentum into what you can do, and you like start to show that a first step was successful. You're like, okay, I watered the tree. The next step is like, okay, the next one's like I met my neighbor and now I know that we can call each other and depend on each other if like something if the power goes out, and then you start to build this like momentum. These steps turn into strides, they turn into jogs, they turn into runs, and all of a sudden you're actually like running together in a pack. And if anyone's ever run in a group, like it feels great because you're like not just hit by yourself. Like it's a lot of motivation. But when you start to find your pack, your community to do that, like it's a big thing. And so I want to say I'm like very honored to be on this panelist of like 5 published authors. I'm working on my first book right now, so I admire both all of your work already. But my book is actually called One Small Step, and it follows my journey of how I've answered the question, what is the biggest impact I can make in sustainability? And the reason it's called One Small Step is because like it always takes one small step to get to the next one. And I think about every time travel movie we've ever watched, but it says like, don't move the cup because you might change the whole trajectory of this timeline. Or
Yeah.
like, don't close that door because then the person's not going to trip over the stick that like does this whole thing. So when we think about how impactful these movies talk about like your impact of one small thing, like I zero back into our present day right now, radically accepting we're present here. And like I asked myself, like, what is a small thing I could do, which seemingly is innocuous, but actually could have huge impact. So I focused on that, where like you can make a small random act of kindness and have reverberating impact you will never know about. And I think in the same way, I think we should all be empowered to know that like if we take that small step, it'll do something.
I would like to add on a little bit about that, just about the stickiness of optimism. I know that there's a lot of emotions that have a lot of, they're very attention grabbing, like rage and fear. But I don't think they're as sticky as optimism is because the surge of adrenaline goes away and typically what comes out of it is that we've pushed away potential allies. And so with a optimistic movement that is based in inclusion for everyone, that actually has better results and longevity. And so that's something that I think is important to note, is that optimism has a sense of longevity to it, whereas these kind of short-term actions that are rage based might make a great clickbait article, but they typically isolate and divide versus inspire and bring people together.
I just want to jump in here to say actually that the research, including my own, actually specifically talks about what emotions are most effective at mobilizing and giving people a sense of efficacy. And it's really important to note here that anger is one of the most effective. I don't know how you're operationalizing rage here, but anger is an emotion that gives people a sense of what they can do. And if you look at the most effective social movements and the literature and the data on the people who participated, anger brings them together and holds them together. I mean, and in my last book, which was called American Resistance, about the first resistance to the Trump administration, I talk about how outrage actually mobilized the movement that brought us to the blue wave, which at least pushed back against the Trump administration for a period of time, if not ending it forever.
Well, I think to that point too, I think optimism and anger and every other emotion that can coexist. We don't have to choose one and then stick to it. I think part of not, tending to spiritual bypassing and the toxic practice of it all is thinking that we have to, okay, I chose to be an optimist and therefore I'm an optimist. And I'm not allowed to be afraid or sad or angry or all these different things. And for me, I used to be, my TEDx talk is called From Angry Activist to Climate Optimist, and what that journey looked like. And what I fell victim for it, and what I continue to see in other people who come to this movement, or for lack of a better word, is that we believe that since anger, because many times it is the anger that triggers us. Like, this makes me so angry. I need to do something about it. And then we find allies and we feel motivated. And I think the anger, to your point, Dana, really like gets us to come together and do something. It brings us out of the couch and the complacency in our scrolling to like, let's do something. And that in itself is empowering. But I think the problem is that we tend to think that since anger triggered me and made me want to act, I have to continue to tap back into that anger and remain angry about whatever issue. And that's how we run ourselves dry. We hit the wall, we get exhausted, we feel like we're lacking hope and direction, because anger is like, it creates a tunnel vision. Like, yes, it allows us to focus on what it is we're angry about and like get the action rolling for that. But it also sort of, it makes it harder to see outside and see the bigger picture and become creative and come up with new solutions and get excited about it and infuse joy. So I think to that point, it's okay to be angry, but we don't have to remain angry to continue to do the important work. And I think that's, for me, like the big piece of the practice of optimism is tending to ourselves, recognizing our own boundaries, allowing ourselves to have bad days and be frustrated or angry or sad, and then better days. And I think it's the up and down and recognizing our humanness through it all is what will sustain us. And so it's more inclusive in terms of other people wanting to get on board, but it's also more inclusive towards ourselves and recognizing our full range of emotions. So I'm just adding that to the mix because I do think anger is powerful, but for myself, it wasn't conducive to my bigger impact, and it wasn't helping me in like nurturing myself in a way that I could keep showing up, especially as now a mother of two and feeling drained every single day I go to bed. So yeah, I think there's a lot to it, but yeah, I quit there. I just want to add, like, there's so much, and we shouldn't mistake it again for this toxic positivity or like choose one lane and stick to it. Like, we have to really merge it all.
Of course, I would think it's good to clarify that the action shouldn't be the display of anger. That's definitely what I'm trying to just bring forth, that the action itself should be something that progresses climate solutions forward versus just the presence of outrage or anger.
Well, you've given me so many things to ask that I don't even know what to ask because there's so much stuff there, and I'm kind of feeling this sense of feeling overwhelmed a bit, and that came up in one of the answers. And I guess what I want to ask is, how do you set or reassess your boundaries when you're, because climate work can be very overwhelming. So how do you set or reassess your boundaries while still staying very committed to the work and being optimistic too.
I can hop in here because I am actually about 1 year, a little over a year now, of not working full time. And I got let go from my last job. And I, for context, like I'm a workaholic. And I'm not anymore though. A recovered workaholic, right? And I used to tie my success at work to my success as a human because my work was mission driven. And the more panels I put in the ground, the more I was doing a great job. The more people I convinced to use mobile battery stations, the more that were less generators in use. And so suddenly all of my work was like what defined me as a person. And it wasn't until I actually got let go that I was like, oh, wow, that was a little bit of that was a little toxic. Uh, I loved my job so much. It was the best job I had so far, and at the same time, I gave my whole body and soul to that thing, and everyone around me saw it. And they're all like, we joked, but someone was like, my boyfriend at the time was like, "How do you unwind?" And I was like, "I put my head on a pillow and I fall asleep." And he was like, "That's not really unwinding." And I was like, "What do you mean?" You just fall asleep, and I wake up again. I repeat it all over again. And so I think what I've learned in my past year of actually recharging, taking time off, is like creating space is so important. And maybe to even take that one step back is even more actionable. I create 90-day plans, and I'm like, what do I want to like? 90 days from now is take today, November 5th, 2025. What do I want to have done by that time frame? And I list everything I want to do. And I go, what is a hell yes? And what is a anything less than that? And then I start to whittle that down. Like the hell yeses I keep. The yeses I'm like questioning. The maybes I say no to. The nos are absolute nos. And so I think I'm curious what the other panelists will say on this because I know you all have been so accomplished and do so many things. But this is kind of the way like reassess, like, am I inching towards that boundary again? Am I saying yes to too much? And then I also add a layer to that, which is like, how much time do each of these hell yeses take in my week? And by the way, did I even put hell yes to getting 8 hours of sleep a night, which I know is a luxury for some. But like I'm like, okay, how do I get that? Right. And did I even make time for my family or for like myself or for my boyfriend or like these other hobbies? And I think that's how you kind of like look at the full picture of where my time is going and say like, is this actually feasible? And most of the time now, I'm like, it's not. And so I start to like cross things off. I start to weed them out. And I think that's a really important thing because we have to keep both the immediate, like smaller near term chunks aligned with what our big term goals are, because this is a marathon and there is no way we're going to be able to sprint through this thing without rest or without going and taking a break in nature and remembering why we're doing this. Like, why am I looking at Aspen in Yosemite and be like, oh my God, this is so important to protect? So I think it's finding those moments of recharge and breaks and creating space for that.
Yeah, the protecting what is important about what we're trying to protect, it seems so obvious, but it's something that's often missed, I think, especially by those that are very passionate and using majority of their time to try to push progress forward. It came to a head to me recently when I had some house guests come and we went to a baseball game and I was looking around and there were like fireworks going off. Everyone's like yelling and eating, just like a bunch of food in plastic and stuff. And I just was like feeling a lot of anger and I I kind of felt embarrassed to be there, that like it was so against everything I was trying to do. And I was like really building an entire narrative about everyone that was at a baseball game, including myself. But I was like, this is what's wrong with, I was just like really going down a really bad place. It was a bad week out in the internet. And so I really realized, like, what am I doing? Like, aren't I here to protect community and joy and the things that make us human? But then I am I've gone so far that I'm actually judging what I'm wanting to savor. And so that was something that really made me reassess all of my boundaries just recently. And I do think it is something that we have to do often. We have to really check in with ourselves. I've been really working on secondary and primary emotions where I try to understand what my primary emotion is at that time and ensure that I am not applying a secondary emotion. So you feel angry about a new policy that is being pushed forward. And then you feel guilt about how you're unable to do something about it right at this moment. And I was struggling with a lot of those secondary emotions. And so that's something that I've been really working towards and has helped me move from feeling overwhelmed to actually figuring out what do I have in my control and what is something what's the one emotion that I need to work through so that I can come out the other side.
I think everybody's got to get a radical therapist. If you don't have one that approaches your healing from a position of deconstructing really painful and terrible systems that are in the dominant culture, I recommend you give it some consideration. I'm actually coming on the just on the other side of some pretty severe burnout. I think myself, like a lot of women of color, like a lot of women, a lot of people in care tasks. And if you work in climate, I'm going to call that a care task, similar to being a teacher or to a nurse. You are trying to protect and usher and express love and care for other people in this way. And those groups of people have no self preservation instincts. I think we're just sort of culturally raised to not have that preservation, to constantly give of ourselves. Cynthia, to your point, to conflate our identity and worth as a person with the productivity that we have and how committed to the mission that we are in our really short life. And so, in addition to the sort of radical therapy work, which again I really highly recommend people get involved in, I think it's important to understand like who you're negotiating for, and I think that all of this type of work is a type of negotiation. You're trying to push for change, and to make sure to include yourself in that negotiation for change. That you're not just fighting on behalf of other people, but you're also fighting on behalf of yourself. And what is the best life for other people that you wish, and how can you bring that best life to yourself? That grace and rest that you wish for other people. How do you bring that grace and rest to yourself? So if you're struggling with this, if you're struggling with burnout, if you're struggling with low preservation instinct, I see you. There is hope on the other side. You can get there.
I want to say too, this actually sort of weaves into the work because yes, we need to step away from the work and tend to ourselves to make sure that we can continue through the marathon and not just address it as a sprint. But for the work itself, we have to recognize that we need to go to a place within ourselves or in our own brilliance that allows for new big visions and ideas to come through. And I love this notion of slow down to speed up because we are stuck in this hamster wheel that we're expected to consume all this information, all this content and with social media and the numerous different platforms. It's just like a bombardment all day. And of course, we get overwhelmed. And then we feel like, okay, well, for me to stay informed and show people that I am informed, I have to share what I'm seeing and have an opinion about it. But like what we really are doing is just continuously pushing around already existing thoughts and ideas. And so, how do we create the space for the new thoughts and ideas to come through and emerge? And how do we get in tune with our inner knowing somehow that like even the intuition that guides us of like, is this a good idea? Is this not a good idea? Are we actually moving in the right direction? Are we sprinting into a different bad direction? And so for me, like the radical slowing down is not just to sustain ourselves, but to be really smart about the next steps forward. So we shouldn't just continue to push like, yes, I'm all for urgency in the climate movement. Let's activate solutions we know are good. Let's really go for it. Let's try. Let's embrace change. But amidst all that, I think recognizing that no one can do it all. We cannot minimize ourselves to, oblivion. We all going to have a footprint. So let's just kind of like heal that part about it. So let's shift the focus from minimizing to doing something better. Figure out how you want to matter, how you can make an impact, and then like hone in on that, right? Like allow yourself the space to get very clear on where you want to matter, where you want to focus your energy, and like get a little nerdy about that. And I think when we trust, I know not everyone is there, but trust that other people will find their own brilliance, their own line of work, and we just get really joyful and excited about the work that we can do and what we're passionate about, what our skills are, what comes easy to us, what are we good at, and like how can we bring that to the climate work itself. I do think we create the space that allows for it to come through clarity. I know there's a lot of words in here, but what I'm trying to say is we have to dare to slow down and step out of the like urgency, kind of like frantic mode, so that we can step with clarity into the future that we're trying to build. I believe that to my core, and it's been very healing to embrace that mindset, because for so long I was stuck in this, like, I need to do more, I need to do it faster, and there's more hours in my day, and I can probably squeeze it in somewhere. And because my work is so important, I should focus on that first. I should prioritize the work. And then there was actually a mentor of mine who said, okay, let's just build a scenario. Let's say you're a, what do you call it? Jesus, a surgeon, and someone you love dearly comes into the operating table because they were in a car accident. What would you do in that moment? Would you prepare the room, prepare all the nurses, make sure everything is clean and ready to go, or would you rush into the surgery just because you want to save the person so much? And I said, well, of course, I will make sure everything is according to routine and like nothing can go wrong and everyone is prepared and ready. He's like, yeah. So how would you treat your work any differently? And that really flipped things for me, because the urgency itself just continues to make me stumble and feel depleted and like I'm not having clarity around it. And so, again, like setting the boundaries, recognizing ourselves as part of it all, it's not just to sustain ourselves, but to be very smart about the steps we take forward. So, yeah, that's my little thought about it.
I just want to remind everyone that we have the same brains that our ancestors did 300,000 years ago, with dramatically different inputs and responsibilities. So if you're feeling just kind of about it, it's you're the early ancestors were, I don't know if we had brains that were built for exactly this structure. So have some grace on your
Yeah.
very old brain.
Well, I have like, I think we've got through like half the questions I wanted to ask you, but we only have like 4 minutes before this went by super fast for our audience. So maybe I think I guess maybe one last quick question to the panel, and I'm trying to decide what the best one is. But for me, I'm really curious about not just for the people here on the panel, but maybe as the ones here listening. What do you want to come from maybe this conversation in terms of momentum in the climate movement? How can we work together and increase more of that urgency that we do need?
Well, I'll jump in with something, which is that for me, one really clarifying moment was when I got to, I spoke at or I moderated a panel at the COP25 Climate Change Summit in 2019 on how AI could fight climate change. And obviously, that's a few years before ChatGPT got released to the general public. So I was a little ahead of the mainstream conversation on AI. But, many of us had been thinking and talking about AI for a long time. But what was meaningful to me about that was that it was very aligned. All of the panelists were very aligned with sustainable development goals and, trying to think in a very proactive and productive way about using the technology, using the resources in ways that were demonstrably making change, making improvements. And that I feel like is still with me to this day. Years later, it's what I think so much about is there are existing frameworks for how we can measurably impact the climate, how we can measurably impact everyone on this planet's life for the better. And we have tools, we have resources, we have means of making that impact. And that's what I would really love to see more alignment toward how we actually move ourselves toward something measurable, something achievable, something, whether it's the sustainable development goals or another framework, another set of goals, another set of initiatives. I just think that there's so much that we can do and there's so much that we need to do. And there are demonstrable and measurable ways that we can get there, and that's what I'm really hoping to bring every time I step on a stage, every time I advise a client. I'm trying to get that to be part of the conversation, and that I'm hoping that that's something we're all carrying forward. For me, I guess, so I've been doing this since the 1990s. And it's funny because I was going to tell a story about COP6, which was in 2000. But I think maybe I'll just leave that aside and point out that for all of you all who have been talking about how this is a marathon, not a sprint, it is absolutely a marathon. And when I started out doing this in the 1990s, being on a panel with a bunch of women was very, very uncommon. And being on a panel with a bunch of people who were thinking in careful ways about how we really can bring about a mindset that can get us to positive change and can sustain us was also not happening. Because all we were thinking about, or all a lot of people were thinking about, was who can get the most money to save the polar bears. But I would just say, like, so what gives me hope and what I hope to get out of this conversation is to think about how we can, work better together and work more as a collective, because one of the big challenges today is that there's just too much anomie, there's too much individualism and not enough collectivism. And solving the climate crisis is a collective problem that's going to take systemic changes. We all know that. And working together is part of it. So I guess that gives me hope and makes me optimistic, even as I am realistic about the path that we are on.
Question from the audience here was asking for some solid resources for folks wanting to do more around climate action.
I'll just say, since you asked, I have been called to start something myself. I'm going to start something called the Climate Optimist Cohort that I'm currently taking applications for. And then I'm not saying scientifically like what that will look like yet, but it's to bring together people who are in a similar boat of like, how do we empower ourselves? So it's going to be more in the realm of like, what does that empowerment training look like for ourselves? Please apply if you feel like that could be interesting. I also want to plug the inner development goals. They have ambassador programs that you can apply for right now. So the IDGs, if you haven't learned about them before, they are sort of complements to the SDGs. And they're focused on, again, the inner leadership that we nurture so that we can continue to show up for the work. I love them. I think they're awesome. I myself going to take the training this winter. And they have different price points, but they're called the inner development goals. And they have certifications if you take their training. So that could be something to look into as well. And I can also plug the links. If anyone would love to join the cohort, I'll share the link because I would love to see you there.
I want to check out Anne's cohort. But a few that I'm aware of. So the Climate Reality Project is through Al Gore. They do a bunch of education programs on how to talk about climate. Climate Fresque is another one I just heard of, which is like kind of a game where like you kind of interact and learn to be facilitators to talk about the different aspects of climate change. The third is, I have so many. Eric Benson and I met through the Climate Wisdom Fellowship. He's Spencer Honeyman. It was the beautiful intersection of climate leaders doing the inner work. And I was like, this Venn diagram is just like so set to who I am. I actually just came back from a 4-day backpacking retreat with climate leaders in Yosemite. So it's like sticking really close to me right now, what it means to take up space and be in nature for that. And I will do a plug for like, if you are to do a master's program or sustainability certificate, Columbia has a sustainability management program, also sustainability science certificate, which I know is a little more on that sciencey side, but I have a Master of Science in Sustainability Management, and I took less science classes in my master's than I did when I got my BA in Quanticon in undergrad. So you can make it what you will of that. And I would say Presidio Graduate School in San Francisco is a really great sustainability-focused MBA. Tear.do is another great one, and I will also put the link there.
What are you guys doing next? What's your next big move? I know
Making
yours.
it through the Trump administration is what I think it's what I think it is just kind of white knuckling it through the roller coaster of changes. And I think that that's fine. And that's enough. And that's the goal, is to keep our communities as safe as we can, to keep ourselves as safe as we can. I'm trying to wind down the, hashtag boss girl do more, to focus a little bit more on, which is fine for other people to do, but to focus a little bit more on how do we get through the next couple of years and maintain people's energy and give people a sense of direction, and to take a good look at like, what is our human responsibility in this moment, and what's our responsibility to other folks. I think that's how I'll be focusing it. That's my very blunt answer.
During the day, my 9 to 5, I work on super pollutant mitigation. And so I have a goal of avoiding 1 million tons of super pollutant emissions. And then my 5 to 9 is just helping those that are seeking to have collaborative conversations feel more empowered to be able to do so. There's a few organizations that I'll put in the chat. And there's also a design cohort that was really interesting from how to communicate around climate. And so that would be one that would be interesting to explore as well. But just speaking about this work and coming from a sense of curiosity so that that can inspire more collaborative conversations. That's where I'm focusing. I was definitely privy to feeling that I was responsible for all of it and needing to work as hard as possible to save the world. And then I realized that that's not healthy nor realistic. And so I've been working really hard on being just a really strong link in the chain that's required to solve
Mhm.
this crisis.
I'm taking a lot of inspiration from everything everybody has said here about self-care because I think I am still trying to save the world. Only I think I'm doing it across a couple of different facets. So, right now the conversation around AI is so massive and overwhelming. And so what is next for me is really uh, promoting my book, What Matters Next. And that is so much about, putting these tech decisions in context. And some of that context is really about the the climate impacts of using AI in various ways, and like the the climate cost of rolling out AI solutions for things that aren't necessarily appropriate use of the technology. And so, we have an awful lot of ways that I think AI can be helpful to us in the net in the sort of over analysis and the analysis of it all. But the conversation is still taking shape, and that's something that I feel very committed to being a part of. So that's very much on my radar for the foreseeable future.
My next big goal is to finish my book. And so I keep saying, I'm like, oh, I'm almost done. And I'm like, wait, I'm actually less than half. So my big thing is getting the draft of that book done. I have so many questions for the other panelists after this about how you manage that publishing journey. But I think my goal is to get that out there because the more I talk to, like I mentioned, I have very serendipitous conversations with people about climate. And I tell them about my book and they're like, I want to read it. And I was like, it doesn't exist yet. So I really do want to get that in there. I'm also part-time consulting to do go-to-market strategy and strategic partnerships for other clean tech companies right now. It's still like, I think where my heart is at when I think of the immediate impact I have with the skills that I have, but also maintaining that space and creative space to still rest and maintain that boundary that I talked about, and also maintain space so I have the ability to create and really create through my writing.
I've actually shifted a lot of the work that I've been doing, partially because much of it is federally funded, but also partially because it's kind of where the need is, to focusing on disaster response, recovery, and building resilience in communities. So we've been focusing our work around climate exacerbated extreme events, which gives us the opportunity to think more tangibly about responding to the climate crisis and the effects of the climate crisis, which are absolutely coming. So I'm doing that, but then I also, I'll be at New York City Climate Week, and Therese and I believe, are both going to be at the same. I can't remember the name of it now, but the same event. Going to probably be at the TED Countdown House at COP30. So anybody who's around those places should definitely come by.
That's
I think it's
awesome.
called Mic Drop or something.
Yeah, mic drop. Mic drop. That's Wednesday.
Thank you, everybody. And I wish you a wonderful evening, most likely, wherever you are in the world. And keep up the hope, because there's a lot of good stuff happening. And it's evident here by our 6 amazing panelists. Thanks for listening. We want to hear from you. What did you take away from this discussion? Email us at climifypodcast@gmail.com or connect with us on Instagram at climifypodcast. We would love to read your inspirational stories on the show in upcoming episodes. This program is produced by Jackie Himmel, Bhavna Bhavani Shankar, and Adam Java. A big shout out to our new designer this season, Tyler Mayfield, and our social media strategist, Brianna Reggioni. Sound engineering and editing by me, Eric Benson. A special thanks to Mark O'Brien at the Climate Designers. You can find design prompts and more information on all of our guests this season at climateDesigners.org/edu/Climify and on Instagram and LinkedIn at Climify Podcast. If you enjoy the work we all do here and you have a spare minute or two, we would truly appreciate it if you left a rating and review over at Apple Podcasts. The more folks reviewing our program, the higher the algorithm pushes us up in the search results. And in turn, the more likely we all could learn how to become climate designers.